welcome to this first episode of the Energy Bridge podcast. Today we have a really important guest for us, which is the academic director of our master program at TU Wien, Professor Reinhard Haas. Thank you for coming. He's very known researcher. He has been more than 10 years in the energy sector, seeing the evolution of energy transition in Europe.
Professor, we would like to know about your journey first, and of course, how you got up in the energy industry, how you see it evolving over the years.
I started working in the field of energy in a time in the 1980s when there were several energy crises. We had the oil crisis 2 times, we had high jumps in the oil prices in the 80s, and in the 1980s also the emergence of renewable sites, renewable plants was pretty much dispersed. So in Spain they started with some solar power plants. In France they had some geothermal power plants. We were discussing about wind. It was too early at the beginning of the 1980s for wind energy, but hydropower was already used in broad applications. So it was a time where there was a discussion, should we go towards renewables, which were not really developed at that time, or should we stick to the old system of coal and nuclear-based electricity system.
Well, was there any resistance about any resistance for the hydropower plant in Austria when it started?
We had not resistance when it started, but we had resistance regarding the last projects that has been put on the table. For example, there was one project in Hainburg, close to the border of Slovakia. A large hydropower plant was planned at the Danube, and finally it was not constructed because of the resistance. But at the Danube 10 years later, about 1993, there was another project in Freudenau in Vienna, and finally it was set into practice, mainly because there was a public vote. And the public vote was 60% in favor of the power plant.
60%, okay, that's good.
You mentioned that you were already talking about renewables in those times in late 80s and early 90s. So what kind of renewables apart from hydro project that you were discussing?
No, we were discussing in theory more or less wind power plants, and there were some practical examples, as I said, in Spain, in Almeria, where they had the first solar tower plant, and with heliostats and other distributed collector systems. And I had the chance to be there and to work there for some time in the mid of the 1980s. And actually, in about 1985, the oil prices dropped, and at that point, the interest in alternative power plants, as they were called at the time, more or less fully disappeared. So there was no more public support, and no other plants were constructed, I think, for the next 30 to 40 years in these areas of solar power.
Okay, so before it was cheaper to generate electricity out of oil, so there was not incentive to use the oil.
Yeah,
right.
This is one of the major boundary conditions. If you have cheap fossil energy, there is no incentive to invest in a little bit more expensive renewable technologies, for example.
Next topic that we want to cover, it's we are coursing master degree with Raul, we are classmates, in this renewable energy system master degree. But we knew that at the beginning it had another name, which was renewable energy in Central and Eastern Europe. So we would like to know what was your vision at the beginning of the program to focus on this particular region. What did you see and how do you see it further from now on?
Actually, in the beginning, there were cooperations between 3 countries close to each other, and these 3 countries were Slovakia, Hungary and Austria. So it was just the eastern part of Austria who participated in this. And we made it more or less bottom up. That is to say, we had energy experts from Slovakia, we had some professors from Hungary, from Mosel Motjarova, and from Energiepark Bruck, which is situated in the region. They had a very important role in bringing about this course. Together with Technical University of Vienna, we are also situated in this area. This was the beginning, but finally after some years we recognized that the interest in the course is going by far beyond this region. And after some time you also see in a region, let's say, no more very new projects. We had in Austria a lot of good developments, but finally, for example, in our neighbor countries, the interest was not so high as in Austria.
Okay. And Vienna located in the center of Europe, like strategically next to Eastern Europe, with knowing what's happening there.
But this was by chance, so.
Okay, that's part of it.
Yeah.
And how long it was still called the CEE?
I think it was about the first 7-8 years.
Okay.
And then we said, let's say, renewable energy for the whole world. But we finally recognized that it doesn't make sense just to look at single technologies.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is to look at the system. And this was the reason why we had renamed the course Renewable Energy Systems. And the integration of the different types of renewable energy sources into the existing system is, from my point of view, still today the most important aspect, and you have it in an own module in the course, in the module 7.
We still have a lot of integration with the Central and Eastern Europe. We went to the field trip to Hungary,
Yeah.
and we had a lot of professors coming from like other countries as well. And most of the professors, they have expertise in Romania and Poland. I mean, we were so lucky also to have a professor from Iceland.
Even Iceland.
Yes.
You mentioned your work with the government and how you saw in the 80s and the 90s working firstly in the renewable industry. Do you see any changes in the energy system, and when exactly you see it evolving and the catalyst of the renewable that it really came and people started taking it more seriously?
I mean, what is for me the most interesting aspect is a change in the culture of the energy industry. Because, let's say, until the 1990s in Austria, we had just energy companies who intended to deliver electricity to people without having any contacts to them or without accepting any feedback or something like that. And in the 1990s, we had a slow but finally rather sudden change in this attitude. Maybe background, in 1978 we had a public poll in Austria regarding the use of nuclear power. And people voted against nuclear power, but the industry still thought they might find a loophole somewhere to introduce nuclear nonetheless. And finally, after Chernobyl in 1986, Austria said nuclear is dead for this country, and we have since then a law which forbids the use of nuclear power.
Okay, and in the meantime, there was some kind of public knowledge or education about the energy transition to...
At that time, the word energy transition did not exist. In Germany, you have the word Energiewende, and it was created in 2011.
Okay.
And now it's called energy transition, and energy transition is also very strongly linked to the issue of reducing the carbon emissions.
Okay.
And the carbon and climate change have not been a topic, I would say, in the 1990s or in the last century. It emerged maybe 2005, 2000 with Kyoto, but before this was not on the table.
Okay, so this is, well, before it was all about like climate change or what was the term used before energy transition?
We also had different boundary conditions. I don't know how it was in Chile, simply from the economic growth or energy growth, but in Europe we had growth rates of energy demand of 3, 4, 5% per year. What is currently the growth rate of energy in India? It's still about, I think, something like 4% per year.
I think it's about 7.7.
7, yeah. So it was steep going up. And as I have showed you, emissions are at least high. So in Austria, the growth has slowly declined, but it's not enough. At that time, it was just a fight. How do we provide the electricity? By means of new alternative energy like solar, or by old energy like natural gas or coal.
And Austria was always energy sufficient. I mean, I don't know if you would be able to relate or not, but even in my childhood, we never had 24-hour electricity. In certain part of India, you still don't have 24-hour electricity. It's a recent phenomena. But how do you see that in Austria? So, because I'm trying to understand like the citizen perspective, that they take it for granted, or
yes,
because it's always been there, right? The
yes,
24-hour electricity.
Yes. And actually, the young people do not know any more about the history. So
now it's granted. Electricity is.
Yeah, but it's the same, I think, in all countries. You do not know what happened 30, 40 years ago.
True.
Yeah, true. So moving forward a bit to know the landscape in Eastern Europe, we know that there are several countries who are depending on coal. So how do you see the Eastern Europe energy matrix, their challenges and opportunities in order to decarbonize the energy matrix?
Also, just adding to that question, that having the regional perspective, because we see Austria is somewhere, I would say, still the advanced energy system, but Poland, which is very coal reliant, or Romania, where you also have nuclear. So it's very unique challenges that these countries bring. So what do you think about it?
I think you have to differ between the nuclear and the coal issue. Coal is pretty cheap. You do not need a lot of investments if you use coal. Okay, it's burning and it's dirty, but it's cheap. So, example, Czech Republic. Say, the government could say, we phase out of coal, but the people have to pay. And this is not possible. So the German way is maybe a different one. They have said we want to phase out coal by 2028 or something like that. But in Czech Republic, the politicians do not have the money to support people. And what would you suggest? Some heat with coal and many heat with district heat. And district heat is also produced from coal. What is of interest is that in the, let's say, former communist countries, they have a lot of district heating systems. That is to say, the people do not necessarily use coal directly to heat in a single stove, but they have a huge district heating network. And this is an infrastructure which has been built and it exists. Okay, and what is in addition of interest is, for example, Czech Republic does a lot of research in biomass. I would say they do more research in biomass and they are more advanced with some technologies. And we in Austria are in some dimensions, let's say, lucky, because we have biomass use since I can remember, and also in the 1960s, 1970s, we started the so-called sustainable use of biomass, especially also for heating and to some extent for district heating. So on the one hand, it depends on which sources are available, and on the other hand, it is also something, a question of costs. I would not just say economics, but also of costs. And it's difficult to give some general advices, for example, to Poland, because they do not have any other source available. They could change to natural gas from Russia, but this is of course not,
dependency.
yeah.
And how do you see the renewable resources in Poland, for example, solar or wind? Do you see?
We have identified in a joint projects quite high resources for wind, also wind offshore in the north. And I mean, the solar resources are, you can say, the same as in Austria or in Germany from the level of sunshine hours. Poland is not Portugal or Spain, so they have the same situation as we in Austria. And the PV plants alone will not solve the Polish electricity problems.
And any new resource? Do they have any chance with hydrogen? If you're aware of any project there?
But hydrogen is not the primary energy. Hydrogen is an energy carrier and you have to produce it from another source.
Yeah.
But hydropower depends on the, let's say, difference in altitudes. At the Danube you have a very high difference from one power plant to the other.
Many of them.
Yeah. And if you look at the rivers in Poland, they have almost zero. So it's very, very flat. Poland's very flat, and then you have not the same opportunity to harvest hydropower.
That's why, like, we were making the comparison between Austria being an advanced system compared to these countries. In Romania, it's also a very unique case. Do you have any thought about the Romanian energy system? Because I see a lot of projects happening in Romania, especially for solar and wind. We have our classmate Adina working with a lot of renewable projects there. And they're unique because they also have nuclear. So, what are your thoughts on it?
No, I mean, in the former communist area, they have built nuclear power plants in all of these countries. In German Democratic Republic, Bulgaria, Russia was always in the forefront. And these power plants today exist. They are of generation 2, which is, let's say, a moderate safety level. They are all of the same type as they have it in Ukraine and as it was in Chernobyl. So the power plants exist, and new investments will be very difficult. Where to get the money from? As I said, in Czech Republic, they think now about small modular reactors, which they may purchase from France if this comes about. But from my point of view, if you now start to construct the nuclear power plants, and we have currently very high lead times, it will be too late for the climate neutrality.
Yeah.
And it has high costs. So I think, I don't know what is currently the plan of the new nuclear investments in Hungary, because one plan 10 years ago was to get some money from Russia.
Following up on that, like, do you think there are some critical infrastructure projects that are happening in CEE which should be mentioned here, that you're aware of, that are very critical going forward in the energy system of Central and Eastern Europe?
I think what is positive is they have a very good electricity infrastructure system with respect to the transmission grids, distribution grids, and this is similar to Austria. So we have a very high, let's say, supply security and a very low time of blackouts or something like that of under supply. We had it, I think, some days ago for 45 minutes because there was an accident with some mountains where some parts broke, but this takes 45 minutes and afterwards the system is perfect again. And in addition, in Central Europe, in Europe in general almost, we have very high transboundary transmission capacity. So Austria, Czech Republic have, Germany and Poland have high interconnection, and this is also a backup system to some extent.
One of the advantage of European system is that we are interconnected, but one of the challenges is to decarbonize completely all the matter that
But you think that the energy systems are integrated enough in Europe?
It always depends on which
Region?
Now, which power plants do you have available and where is the demand? For example, in former times, in Germany, they constructed the transmission lines from the nuclear power plants to the large cities. And now you have the electricity produced in the North Sea from offshore wind, but you do not have the proper infrastructure up to now.
Yeah, some months ago we had here in Europe a peak price because of this problem in the transmission.
Yeah, it was in December, and I mean in Germany you have a lot of resistance against new lines within the country, and it's mainly a political issue. So if in Bavaria the head of the government of Bavaria would say, we will construct a lot of transmission lines now in Bavaria, he would no longer be prime minister. So he says, no, we do not want it, despite he knows it's necessary. And this is something that is happening in many areas, also in Austria.
Yeah, the social pressure as well, the kind of opposition to this kind of project. We have heard in Germany that some people even is against wind.
Yeah. I mean, I would say we had some votes now in Austria, in Carinthia. It was not, let's say, at high level, but they were also finally voting against wind power in some specific areas.
Yeah, well, in Chile there is a discussion right now about a solar power plant near to cosmic observatories. So renewable energy is not the silver bullet that everyone wants it, but it's important to receive the social feedback and approval, right? I mean, they're more accepted, but still they have some issues.
And Professor, you mentioned a lot of the times like where the money is going to come when you're talking about the energy system changes in Romania, in Czech Republic, and I mean, to an extent, what do you think is lacking? You think the investment infrastructure is lacking, that's why the energy transition is getting difficult here, or you see some other challenges as well?
I cannot say it for every country, and it is not the same in every country. For example, in Austria, we do not have a lack of money. The money is available, but we have the resistance in different parts against, let's say, the high voltage lines and medium voltage lines. The only barrier, no barrier of money. And in different other countries, it's always a mixture also between the, let's say, political aspect and the aspect of investment. For the future, it's expected that we will need much more investments in the lines, and we have experienced this year also the rate increases for especially also the households. And the rate increases were because of the increasing investments and the stagnating or decreasing electricity demand from the public.
Now addressing in terms of knowledge transfer, I mean, all the main projects are in Central Europe, and the new projects are emerging in Western Europe. So how do you see the knowledge transfer between them? How could be made? How do you see it in the future?
You mean the knowledge transfer all over Europe, or?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of if we see the energy value chain, we see that the energy transition in Scandinavia with new technology is a bit more advanced system compared to Central and Eastern Europe. And do you think the knowledge transfer is happening properly so that this energy system can also catch up? I mean, we see a lot of projects now happening in Romania. There's enough projects happening in Austria, but the knowledge transfer and in terms of expertise or professional and projects, it's happening at the rate that you will be satisfied?
I mean, you could always improve something. And as you said, such countries like Sweden or Austria or Denmark they also had some advantages from the start, you can say. So we had a lot of hydropower, almost 70% already in the 1970s. Norway has 99.99% hydropower, same with Sweden. They have 50% hydro and 50% nuclear. But in Sweden you also have a lot of biomass. So the Nordic countries have a lot of biomass, much more, for example, than Poland. So they have good starting conditions, and this is something you have to bear in mind. And one aspect which is very important is in all sectors to increase the energy efficiency. That is to say, to finally use less energy to produce the goods and other products. And there is something left for, I would say, for Eastern Europe, but it is also costly. You need some investments. And the industry is the sector which is, from my point of view, the sector which is most reluctant with respect to such investments. So households are investing now into photovoltaic systems, into battery storage, and they do not ask when does it pay back. Is it my payback time 1 year or? But the large industry companies, they simply decide by terms of money, and this is the reason why not much is changing. So I have been to a discussion this week, a panel discussion regarding artificial intelligence and the use in the energy sector for energy transition. And these people from the young startups finally said the companies are not at all interested in this because it's too expensive for them, and they do not really want to invest with or without AI.
Yeah, but now, recently, International Energy Agency have declared that from April they're going to open a division to research or see what is happening or what opportunities are with AI in energy sector. So, do you see in the future some kind of opportunities in this with this mix?
I think there would be many opportunities. For example, my son is working in a company which makes the control systems for biomass combined heat and power plants, and they use machine learning and artificial intelligence. They take it out of the data they have collected. They want to do the best efficient operation modes. And the same, to some extent, is happening with respect to forecast of solar energy, with respect to forecast of demand, decentral, and how to bring it best together, cost minimizing, for example, by means of these machine learning approaches. But on the other hand, we have heard that the data centers will consume enormous amounts of electricity, and in the US they have announced to revive a nuclear power plant which has been closed 40 years ago just to provide the electricity for the data center.
Yeah.
So at the end you will see what is the net effect. Will it be less energy consumption or will it be increasing?
What do you think, especially for countries like Brazil, India, and also Germany has a really big data center, and most of the tech giants, they are trying to create the small modular reactor, as you mentioned. And you think in terms of in Europe, so data center and technology and AI, it will consume a lot of, there will be more data center required.
Yeah.
If Europe wants to have the ability of AI. And in terms of acceptance for nuclear and also small modular nuclear reactor, you think there will be more acceptance for the smaller one, or because otherwise the big tech giant, they would like to create their data center somewhere where they don't have to be reliant on someone else for the energy.
I mean, Google.
Yeah. This is what I meant before. I mean, first you have to look at the situation of the small modular reactors. Mm-hmm. And actually, currently you do not have any production line that does proceed the small modular reactors. Mm-hmm. And for example, Bill Gates in the United States had a theoretical project where he made a model, and with the model they finally worked out how such a modular reactor line could look like. So they didn't build any one. We have just 2 practical projects right now, as far as I'm informed. Okay, 2 are in Russia and 2 are in China. In Russia they have started the operation in 2022, but they have actually not really put it fully on the grid. They have capacity factors, I think, of 25%, and the Chinese ones are prototypes where they try to learn something. And the full idea of the small modular reactors is that to construct the largest part of the plant, the parts in the factory, and then you just transport these parts to the site, and there you fix it, put it together. This is the idea.
And how big they are inside, like hundreds megawatts?
The typical size now for an SMR is 400 megawatt.
400 megawatt.
Yeah, in practice we have some of 100 to 200, and I think Rolls-Royce in UK has started to provide also a prototype, but this was finally, the size was changed continuously. I think so you have to learn a lot of how to do it, especially, and how to set up this business model.
It also brings to the nuclear dilemma on the bigger side. We discussed a bit earlier, but the safety standards, the Soviet era nuclear facilities are still running in Romania, in Bulgaria, as you mentioned. But do you see any viability for pan-Europe again? We saw a couple of months ago, Germany, they bulldozed their last nuclear facility, and I think there could be a coming back, especially now that there's so much of deindustrialization going on in Germany, and it can pick up in the other countries as well. So energy security and energy reliance is something that everyone is looking forward to in Europe, and one of the abundance energy that you can have is from nuclear. But you think it can make a comeback, especially in Germany and Austria?
In Austria, never. I talked to guys from the IAEA, which is situated in Austria, and they said before you will construct a nuclear plant in any way in Austria, every African country will have a nuclear plant. And I also don't think that Germany will very soon change its mind. But the simple reality is that in Finland and in France, the last 2 nuclear power plants in Western Europe were constructed, and they were both, let's say, finished last year, or maybe France, Flamanville will be operating fully starting in this year. But Flamanville take construction time of, I think, 19 years. But Flamanville was constructed in the paradise of nuclear in France. So you couldn't have better boundary conditions as they had. And so I think we are not experienced now to do it.
And also bringing the external expertise, especially in the political situation that is currently is not acceptable.
Yeah, actually, going to that topic in the new technologies and innovation, what do you think is the role of research and innovation in order to address energy transition?
I think we have especially to find solutions in the way how we bring and fit the pieces together. One very important aspect is also flexibility. What are possible flexibility or opportunities? And you just do not have one sector. You have electricity sector where you have to retain security of supply in this system. There is a lot of open research questions regarding what would be the modern solution for grid lines today. We have, I don't know, in Chile you have the same, you have 50 years old networks.
Would you like to mention some of the new projects and the research and the innovation that is going on? If there's any new projects that you would like to mention, and how's it coming along?
I think there are, especially in cities, projects in the heating sector where they go completely new ways. So in the heating sector, you have this opportunity of the district heating system, district cooling systems, and you have the opportunity to use the ambient heat from the ground, geothermal, and you have a lot of waste heat. Waste heat is increasing every year, not just from data centers, but also from other companies.
Industries.
Yeah, and you could try to optimally integrate this heat into the systems. In addition, you have in future maybe a completely different transport system. So in the transport system, regardless whether we phase out by 2035 from the fossil energy or not, it will look different in future, and you will not have the same streets and the same connections in future. Maybe even the autonomous driving will play a role, I do not believe it, but it will have much more needs for these information technologies. I see for my son, if he wants to drive somewhere, he just goes to his mobile phone, and in 5 minutes he knows that there will be a vehicle somewhere here close which I can take.
Yeah, there are some videos in California or other states with autonomous taxis. So yeah, it's amazing. So we finished our first episode. We invite you to be updated in your social media and join us to learn together about energy transition in Europe. Try to understand this huge process and challenge.
Thank you, Professor. And
it was a pleasure.
Thank you very much for giving your time, and it's been a pleasure, of course.
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, thank you. See you around.